There are certain moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. A Tuesday night, a simple knock on the door, the sound of rain against the window pane. They don't announce themselves with thunder or fanfare. They slip in quietly, through the cracks of a routine evening, and only in retrospect do you see them for what they were, the hinges upon which your entire world turned. For me, that moment smelled of wet pavement and desperation, and it was shaped exactly like my best friend, Leo, standing drenched on my doorstep just after midnight. He didn't have to say a word. I knew the architecture of his moods as well as I knew the layout of my own small apartment. I could read the tension in the set of his shoulders, the exhaustion in the slight slump of his frame, the frantic energy warring with a deep, bone-weary fatigue in his eyes. He stood there, water dripping from the ends of his dark hair onto the welcome mat, his usual vibrant energy snuffed out, replaced by something fragile and shadowed. His gaze met mine, and it was like looking at a shoreline that had been ravaged by a storm, familiar landmarks of confidence and easy humor washed away, leaving only raw, vulnerable earth behind. "Hey," he said, and the single word was a vessel carrying a whole cargo of unspoken things. It was hollowed out, thin, the sound of a string pulled too taut. I stepped back without a word, pulling the door wider. It was an invitation that needed no language, a gesture we had perfected over 7 years of friendship. My home had always been an extension of his, a safe harbor during the minor squalls of his life. A stressful project at work, a stupid argument with his now ex-girlfriend, a simple need to escape his own four walls. But this felt different. The air was charged with a heavier static, the silence between us denser, more significant. He crossed the threshold, bringing the cold night air in with him, and stood dripping on the hardwood floor of my entryway, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his soaked jacket as if he were trying to hold himself together. I closed the door, shutting out the relentless drumming of the rain, and the world shrank to the two of us in the warm, dim light of my hallway. He looked lost, a ship without a rudder, and every protective instinct I had, every carefully guarded secret emotion I held for him, rose up in a silent, aching wave. I wanted to wrap him in a towel, make him tea, sit him down, and absorb his pain into myself until he was whole again. But I knew better. With Leo, you had to wait. You had to create a space of quiet patience and let him find his own way to the words. He finally lifted his head. His eyes, usually a bright, clear blue, were clouded and dark. "Can I ask you something, Alex?" "Anything," I replied, my voice softer than I intended. It always was around him. He took a shallow breath, and the vulnerability in that small sound was a physical blow. He looked around my quiet apartment, at the stacks of photography books on the coffee table, at the framed print of a misty coastline on the wall, as if searching for something to anchor him. Then his eyes came back to me, holding me in place. "Can you keep a secret?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy and alive. It wasn't a flippant, gossipy kind of question. The weight of it pressed on my chest. It was a plea, a password to a room inside him I had never been invited into before. It was the sound of a lock turning. And I knew, with a terrifying, exhilarating certainty, that if I said yes, if I took that key, nothing would ever be the same again. My secret was that I had been in love with him since our junior year of college. I wondered, with a sudden, sharp pang of hope that was almost painful, what this could possibly be. The shift had begun 3 months earlier, on a Sunday that felt like any other. It started with a phone call, one that severed a 4-year relationship and sent tremors through the foundations of Leo's world. Sarah, the woman I had always thought of as a permanent fixture in his life, a part of the landscape I had long since accepted, had ended it. It was clean, she had said, according to his fractured retelling later that night. No big fight, no dramatic betrayal, just the slow, quiet erosion of feeling, a gradual drifting apart that had finally culminated in her admission that she saw him more as a brother than a future. The finality of it had shattered him. He had built plans around her, sketched out a future with her at the center, and in the space of a 10-minute conversation, it had all been erased. He showed up at my door that first night much like he did on the night of the secret. Only then his grief was loud, jagged, and raw. He wasn't looking for a confidant as much as a witness to his collapse. We sat on my couch, the one with the worn-in spot on the left cushion where he always sat, and he talked for hours. He cycled through anger, disbelief, and a profound, desolate sadness. I just listened, a silent receptacle for his pain. I made him coffee he didn't drink and offered food he wouldn't touch. My role in his life had always been that of the anchor, the steady point in his often turbulent emotional weather. I was the calm, he was the storm, and our friendship operated on that fundamental balance. My feelings for him were a deeply buried stratum of my own geology, something I never allowed to affect the surface of our interactions. It was a secret I had kept for so long it had become a part of my own internal architecture, a load-bearing wall I never dared to inspect too closely for fear the whole structure of my life would collapse. In the weeks that followed the breakup, my apartment became his sanctuary. He'd come over after work, exhausted from the effort of pretending to be fine all day. He'd shed the mask of the competent, cheerful software consultant the moment my door closed behind him. We fell into a new routine. We'd order takeout, put on a movie we'd both seen a dozen times, and sit in a comfortable, healing silence. He didn't want to talk about Sarah anymore. He just didn't want to be alone in the apartment they had once shared, an apartment that had become a museum of their failed relationship. I understood. I cleared my schedule, turned down invitations, and made my space a constant for him. It was the most I could offer, and the most he seemed to need. And that was when the ritual began. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. One evening, we were on the couch watching some mindless action movie, the kind that required no emotional investment. He was slumped against the armrest at his end, and I was at mine. But as the movie wore on, the exhaustion of the day, of the week, of the whole emotional ordeal began to pull at him. I saw his head nod once, then twice. Then, with a quiet sigh, he shifted, stretching his long legs out across the cushions until his feet were resting in my lap. It was such a simple, casual gesture, something he might have done 100 times before. But this time, it felt different. It was a silent request for comfort, an unconscious act of trust. I looked down at his socked feet, resting on my thighs, and my heart did a slow, painful somersault. I carefully kept my hands on the book I was pretending to read, my entire being hyper-aware of those 2 points of contact. The weight of them was both a comfort and a torment. A few nights later, the gesture escalated. He was quiet, more withdrawn than usual. The silence in the room was thick with his unexpressed sadness. We were watching a documentary about deep-sea exploration, the screen filled with the dark, silent world of the ocean floor. He had a blanket pulled over him, and halfway through, he shifted again. This time, he didn't just stretch out his legs. He uncurled his entire body, lying down on the couch and resting his head on my lap as if it were the most natural thing in the world. My breath caught in my throat. I froze, my body turning to stone beneath him. His hair was soft against my jeans, and I could feel the warmth of him, the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of his breathing. The scent of his shampoo, that familiar, clean scent of sandalwood and something faintly citrusy, filled my senses. It was an intimacy so profound, so far beyond the established boundaries of our friendship, that I felt lightheaded. He let out a long, shuddering sigh, a sound of pure emotional release, and nestled his head more firmly against my thigh, seeking purchase, seeking solace. My mind raced, trying to categorize the moment, to file it away in a safe, platonic folder. He's my best friend. He's heartbroken. He's seeking comfort. This doesn't mean what you want it to mean. The litany was a shield, a desperate attempt to protect myself from the hope that was blooming, wild and dangerous, in my chest. I forced myself to relax, to place a hand tentatively on his shoulder, a gesture I hoped read as brotherly, as comforting. But my traitorous heart hammered against my ribs, and the simple act of touching him felt like a confession. He didn't flinch. Instead, he seemed to lean into the touch, a subtle shift of weight that spoke volumes. He fell asleep like that, his face turned towards me, his features softened in the dim light of the television. I sat there for over an hour, unable to move, just watching him breathe, my hand resting on his back, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of his heart through the fabric of his shirt. It was the most exquisite torture I had ever known. This became our new normal. The ritual. He would come over, we would put on a movie, and at some point, he would gravitate towards me. The initial pretense of watching the film would dissolve, and the evening would become about this quiet, shared space of physical comfort. Sometimes he would lie with his head in my lap. Other times, he would sit so close that his entire side was pressed against mine, his head eventually coming to rest on my shoulder, his arm draped loosely around my waist. He never spoke about it. We never acknowledged what was happening. It existed in a strange, unspoken bubble, a third entity in the room with us. Plausible deniability was its name. He needed comfort, and I was his friend, providing it. Any other interpretation was a product of my own wishful thinking. But the lines were blurring, the edges bleeding into one another. I became a scholar of his touch, an expert in the subtle language of his proximity. I could tell the difference between the exhausted slump of a bad day at work and the deeper, heavier weight of loneliness that settled on him some nights. I learned the way his breathing would even out just before he fell asleep, the way his fingers would sometimes twitch and curl against my side. I lived for these evenings, and I dreaded them in equal measure. They were a balm on my soul and a constant, sharp reminder of everything I couldn't have. He would get up at the end of the night, stretch, and thank me for the movie, his voice thick with sleep. He'd walk out the door, back to his empty apartment, leaving me in the echoing silence of my own, my body still humming with the ghost of his warmth, my heart aching with a love that was becoming impossible to contain. I was living a double life. In the daylight, I was Alex, the reliable friend, the steady shoulder. I helped him pack up Sarah's remaining things. I listened to his frustrations about work. I went with him to team dinners where he would put on a brave face, and I would watch from the sidelines, a silent guardian. At these events, he would laugh and joke, and people would comment on how well he was bouncing back. He'd clap me on the shoulder and say to our friends, "Couldn't do it without this guy. He's been a rock," and he would tell everyone we were just friends, the best of friends, and the words were both a truth and a lie that twisted a knife in my gut. Because later, in the privacy of my apartment, in the dim blue light of the television screen, he would fold himself against me, seeking a kind of intimacy that felt anything but platonic. He was drawing a line in the sand for the rest of the world, while in our quiet bubble, he was erasing it with every touch. The dissonance was tearing me apart. I was drowning in the ambiguity, in the vast, uncharted ocean between what was said and what was done. And then came the night of the rain, the knock, and the secret that would finally force us both to sink or swim. Before all this, before the breakup and the ritual and the midnight confessions, there was just the foundation. A friendship built so solidly and over so much time that I sometimes felt it was a geological feature of my life, a bedrock that had always been there. We met in a sophomore year elective, the history of architectural design, a class neither of us needed for our majors, but had chosen out of a shared, vague curiosity. I was a quiet art student, more comfortable behind a camera lens than in a crowd, cataloging the world in frames of light and shadow. He was a burgeoning computer science major, all kinetic energy and quick, easy smiles, a person who moved through the world as if he inherently belonged in it. We were an unlikely pairing of variables, a study in contrasts. Our first conversation was an argument over the merits of brutalism. I was defending its stark, honest utility, its unapologetic use of raw material. He called it soul-crushing and ugly, championing the fluid, organic lines of Art Nouveau. We spent the better part of an hour after class debating, walking across campus under the shade of ancient oak trees, the argument slowly morphing into a real conversation about everything and nothing. Our favorite bands, our hometowns, our shared disdain for the cafeteria's mystery meat. By the time we reached his dorm, I felt a sense of ease I rarely experienced with new people. With Leo, there was no pretense. He was open, genuine, and possessed a curiosity about the world and about me that was disarming. He didn't seem to notice my inherent quietness or my tendency to listen more than I spoke. Instead, he seemed to appreciate it, treating my silence not as an absence, but as a space he could comfortably fill. That was the beginning. We became inseparable. Our friendship wasn't one of grand gestures, but of 1,000 small, accumulated moments. Late-night study sessions in the library fueled by terrible vending machine coffee. Long drives with the windows down, singing off-key to whatever was on the radio. Him, trying to explain the elegant logic of a piece of code to me. Me, trying to explain the rule of thirds and the emotional weight of a particular shade of blue to him. He became my favorite subject to photograph, though he rarely knew it. I have a whole archive of candid shots of him. Leo laughing so hard he's doubled over. Leo concentrating on a line of code with his tongue sticking out slightly. Leo asleep on a pile of textbooks. The afternoon light catching the dust motes dancing around his head. I told myself it was for practice, for my portfolio. I was lying. I was trying to capture the essence of him, to hold on to the light he brought into my life. The moment I knew I was in love with him wasn't a lightning strike. It was a slow sunrise I hadn't realized was happening until the world was already bathed in its light. It was the winter of our junior year. We were at a party, one of those loud, crowded affairs in a house that smelled of stale beer and cheap pizza. I never felt at home in those spaces, but I went because Leo was there. I was leaning against a wall, observing, as I always did, when I saw him across the room talking to Sarah for the first time. She was beautiful, smart, and funny, and she was looking at him with an open admiration that was impossible to miss. And Leo was looking at her with an intensity, a focused attention, that I had seen him give to complex problems and fascinating subjects, but never to a person like that. And in that moment, watching him, a feeling I couldn't name solidified in my chest. It was a sharp, painful, and deeply territorial ache. It wasn't just jealousy. It was a profound sense of loss for something I had never even had. It was the realization that the easy, exclusive orbit our friendship had occupied was about to be invaded by a new, more powerful gravitational force. I saw my future laid out in that moment. I would be the best friend, the confidant, the permanent resident of the periphery of his romantic life. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I would accept it, because the thought of not having him in my life at all was unbearable. So I buried the feeling. I packed it down deep, built walls around it, and learned to live with its quiet, constant weight. I became a master of compartmentalization. I was his biggest cheerleader when he and Sarah started dating. I listened to his stories about their dates, offered advice when they had their first fight, and helped him pick out her birthday present. I smiled, and I was happy for him, because his happiness was, in a strange, masochistic way, my own. Loving him from a distance became my art form. I studied him, learned his heart's desires, his fears, his dreams, all under the safe guise of friendship. I knew he preferred his coffee black with 1 sugar. I knew he had a tiny scar above his right eyebrow from a childhood fall. I knew he hummed, almost inaudibly, when he was truly focused. These were the secret, precious details I collected, the currency of my unrequited love. And for years, it was enough. Our friendship was a vast and beautiful country, and I was content to live in it, even if I couldn't own the piece of land I wanted most. I had convinced myself that this quiet ache was the price of admission for having him in my life, and I had long ago decided I was willing to pay it. Until the day Sarah left, and he started knocking on my door, unknowingly offering me a glimpse of a world I had taught myself never to want. So when he stood in my hallway, drenched and broken, and asked me if I could keep a secret, my entire history with him flashed through my mind. The years of quiet observation, the carefully maintained boundaries, the deep, abiding love I had hidden behind the impenetrable walls of friendship. I had been keeping the biggest secret of all for nearly 7 years. Yes, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my soul. Of course, Leo. Always he seemed to deflate with relief, the tension draining from his shoulders. He finally took off his wet jacket, dropping it in a puddle on the floor. It's It's not about Sarah, he said, as if needing to clarify, to separate this new pain from the old one. Not really. It's something else, I nodded, waiting. I led him to the couch. Our couch, the silent witness to our evolving intimacy. He didn't lie down this time. He sat on the edge of the cushion, leaning forward, his hands clasped between his knees. The picture of turmoil. I did something stupid, Alex, he began, his voice barely a whisper. Or maybe not stupid. I don't know what it was. I went out with some people from work tonight. For drinks. Trying to be normal, you know? I nodded again. And Mark from accounting was there. He's gay. Openly. Everyone knows, and everyone's cool with it. And he was talking about this guy he's been seeing, and he was so happy. Just simple, uncomplicatedly happy. He paused, swallowing hard. I could see the frantic working of his mind, his struggle to connect the thoughts into a coherent narrative. We all had a few drinks, and I ended up walking with him to the subway station. And we were just talking. And then, I don't know why I did it, Alex. I swear to God I don't know, but I kissed him. The words landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical impact. I felt the air leave my lungs. 1,000 conflicting emotions surged through me. Shock, a white-hot flash of jealousy, confusion, and then, underneath it all, a fragile, terrifying flicker of understanding. He was so surprised, Leo continued, his voice cracking. He wasn't looking at me, but at the floor, at his own tightly clenched hands. And he looked at me, and he said, Leo, I don't think you know what you want, and he just left. And I just stood there, in the rain, feeling like the stupidest, most broken person on the planet. I didn't want him. Not like that. It wasn't about him. I don't know what it was about. But when he said that, when he said I didn't know what I want, the only thing I could think of was you. The only place I wanted to be was here. He finally looked up at me, his eyes wide and swimming with a desperate, pleading confusion. What is wrong with me, Alex? And there it was. The secret. Not an action, but a question. An identity crisis wrapped in a desperate, misguided kiss in the rain. He hadn't come to me to confess a transgression, but to confess his own utter lostness. He had spent his whole life navigating with a map that had suddenly been revealed to be blank, and he had come to me, his true north, to try and find his bearings. My own jealousy, my own shock, evaporated. All I could see was my best friend, in more pain and confusion than I had ever seen him. He wasn't asking me for an answer. He was asking me to sit with him in the darkness of his not knowing. The ritual on the couch, the seeking of physical comfort, the unconscious gravitating towards me. It all snapped into a new, terrifyingly clear focus. It wasn't just about him mourning Sarah. It was about a deeper hunger, a need he couldn't name, a comfort he only seemed to find when he was pressed against me. He had been reaching for something, and in his confusion, he had reached for the wrong person out in the world, only to realize the person he was truly reaching for was here all along. I took a deep breath, the first steady one I'd taken since he'd knocked on my door. I was walking through a minefield, and every step had to be deliberate. There is nothing wrong with you, I said, and the certainty in my own voice surprised me. You're grieving, Leo. You're unmoored. You lost what you thought was your future. It's okay to be confused. It's okay to not know what you want. He just stared at me, his breathing ragged. The silence stretched, filled with the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of rain. He looked so young just then, so utterly vulnerable. The carefully constructed persona of the confident, capable man he showed the world was gone, stripped away, leaving only the terrified core of him. Can I? He started, his voice barely audible. He gestured vaguely at the couch, at me. He couldn't even form the words for the request, but he didn't have to. The ritual was too ingrained. He was asking for permission to do what he had been doing for months, but this time, the context was different. The plausible deniability was gone, vaporized by his confession. This was no longer just a friend seeking comfort from a breakup. This was something else, something raw and unnamed. I didn't answer with words. I simply shifted, moving to the center of the couch and leaning back against the cushions. I opened my arms. It was the boldest I had ever been, a direct invitation, a statement without language. It said, "Come here. I am your safe harbor. I will hold you through this storm." He hesitated for only a second, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, and then he moved. He didn't just lie down with his head in my lap. He collapsed against me, curling into my side, his arm wrapping tightly around my waist, his face buried in the crook of my neck. I could feel his tears, hot and wet against my skin, and the shuddering tremors that ran through his entire body. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him securely, my hand stroking his damp hair. I rested my cheek against the top of his head, and for the first time, the gesture felt not like a transgression, but a right, a necessity. We stayed like that for a long time, in the quiet darkness of my living room. He cried silently, a deep, wrenching grief for his old life, for his lost certainty, for the terrifying new landscape he found himself in. And I just held him. I didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. I just offered my presence, my stillness, my unwavering, unconditional support. I poured all the love I had kept secret for 7 years into the simple act of holding him, hoping he could feel it, hoping it could be a balm, a light in his profound darkness. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside my small apartment, the storm had finally found a place to break. And as I held him, I realized that my own secret didn't matter as much as his. My love for him had always been a constant, a quiet truth. But he was just beginning to discover a new, confusing truth about himself. And I knew, with a heart that was both aching and soaring, that I would stay right here and help him navigate it, no matter where the journey took us. The aftermath of that night was not a sudden clearing of the skies. It was more like the slow, quiet dawn after a hurricane. The world muted, damp, and fundamentally altered. The landscape of our friendship had been rearranged. The following morning, I woke up on the couch, a crick in my neck, with Leo still asleep, his body still curled against mine, his breathing deep and even. Sometime during the night, we had shifted, and he was now tucked into my chest, my arm a heavy, protective weight around him. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting stripes across the room, and in that gentle glow, he looked peaceful for the first time in months. The profound confusion of the night before had temporarily receded, replaced by the simple, animal comfort of safe sleep. I watched him for a long time, my mind a whirlwind. He had kissed another man. He had fallen apart in my arms. He had sought refuge in my embrace with a desperation that went far beyond friendship. The hope that I had so ruthlessly suppressed for years was now a wild, untamable thing, roaring through my veins. But it was tempered by a deep, protective fear. He was vulnerable, lost. The last thing I wanted was to take advantage of his confusion, to impose my own long-held desires onto his fragile state. My love for him had to be patient. It had to be a sanctuary, not a cage. He stirred a little while later, a soft groan escaping his lips. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, they were unfocused, hazy with sleep. Then they landed on my face, only inches away, and awareness flooded in. I saw it instantly, a flicker of panic, of shame, of mourning after regret. He pulled back abruptly, disentangling himself from me and sitting up, running a hand through his messy hair. He wouldn't look at me. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, his voice gravelly with sleep. I shouldn't have. I dumped all of that on you. I'm sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for," I said softly, sitting up as well. The space between us on the couch suddenly felt like a vast, empty chasm. "You were hurting. That's what friends are for." The word friends hung there, a shield he had immediately raised. He latched onto it. "Yeah," he said, forcing a small, unconvincing smile. "Friends. You're the best, Alex. Seriously." He stood up, stretching his arms over his head, a gesture of forced normalcy, of trying to put distance between the raw vulnerability of the night and the harsh light of day. He was already rebuilding his walls, brick by painful brick. I could see the process, the careful retreat from the emotional precipice we had stood on just hours before. My heart sank. The next few weeks were a masterclass in avoidance. The ritual of our evenings stopped. He still came over, but he was careful to maintain a physical distance. He'd take the armchair instead of the couch, or he'd sit at the far end of the cushions, creating a buffer zone of pillows between us. The easy, unconscious intimacy was gone, replaced by a tense, hyper-aware politeness. He talked about work, about sports, about anything and everything except the secret he had shared with me. He was trying to put the genie back in the bottle, to pretend that midnight confession had never happened. And I, terrified of pushing him away completely, let him. I followed his lead, reverting back to my role as the uncomplicated, undemanding friend. It was agony. To have been so close to the heart of things, to have held his entire, broken world in my arms, and then to be relegated back to the safe, sterile observation deck. It was a unique and exquisite kind of hell. The breaking point came on a Saturday night, about a month after his confession. A few of our mutual friends had organized a get-together at a local bar. I almost didn't go, but Leo insisted, claiming it would be good for us to get out and be normal. The word normal was a barb. We arrived, and he was immediately in his element. The charming, extroverted Leo everyone knew and loved. He was laughing, telling stories, buying rounds of drinks. He was wearing his mask, and it was flawless. I watched him from a corner table, nursing a beer, feeling like a ghost at the feast. A mutual friend, Chloe, came and sat with me. "He seems so much better," she said, nodding towards Leo, who was now engaged in a loud, animated debate about football. I was really worried about him after the breakup, but he seems to be bouncing back. "You've been amazing with him, Alex. He told me you've basically been his lifeline. I'm just glad to see him smiling," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "He's lucky to have a friend like you," she continued, and then she lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Seriously, some people were starting to wonder about you too, you know? You've been spending so much time together." But he set them straight. He told Mark from our kickball team just the other day that you guys are just friends. Best friends. That it's completely platonic. He made a point of saying it. Each word was a hammer blow. He wasn't just avoiding the topic with me. He was actively broadcasting our platonic status to the world. He was drawing the line in the sand again, this time in permanent ink, for everyone to see. He was using the shield of our friendship to hide, and in doing so, he was invalidating every moment of intimacy we had shared, rendering my entire experience into a one-sided delusion. The pain was so sharp, so sudden, it took my breath away. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was a profound, soul-crushing humiliation. I made my excuses and left without saying goodbye to him. I walked home, the cold night air doing nothing to cool the furious, wounded heat in my chest. I had been patient. I had been a sanctuary. I had held his secrets and his fears and asked for nothing in return. But I could not be his closet. I could not be the place he stored his confusion while publicly disavowing its existence. My love for him demanded more. I deserved more. When he called me an hour later, I let it go to voicemail. He texted, "Hey, where'd you go? Everything okay?" I stared at the message, the casual concern of it, the complete obliviousness, and something inside me hardened. I texted back a single sentence. "We need to talk." The crossing of the line didn't happen with a kiss, not at first. It happened with that text message. It was me, the quiet observer, finally stepping out from behind the lens and into the frame. It was the moment I stopped letting him dictate the terms of our silence. He showed up at my apartment 20 minutes later, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "What's wrong?" he asked as soon as I opened the door. "You just disappeared." I didn't invite him in. I just stood in the doorway, my arms crossed over my chest, creating a barrier where there had always been an open passage. "Chloe told me what you said to Mark," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the warmth he was used to. "About us being just friends, about how you're making a point of telling people that." His face fell. He had the decency to look ashamed. He broke eye contact, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Alex, I don't." I cut him off, my voice shaking slightly with a rage born of deep hurt. "Don't you dare try to explain it away. For months, you have used my apartment as your sanctuary. You have used my body as your pillow. You have cried in my arms and told me your deepest, most confusing secrets. You have sought a level of physical and emotional intimacy with me that you have never sought from anyone else. And then you walk out that door and you tell the world that it's nothing, that it's just platonic? You don't get to do that, Leo. You don't get to use me to figure out your own stuff and then publicly deny the very nature of what you're doing. It's cruel. And it's cowardly. The words, my words, hung in the air, sharp and brutal. It was the most honest I had ever been with him, and it was terrifying. I had just risked everything. The bedrock of our friendship, the very foundation I had built my life on for 7 years, was now trembling. He looked up at me, and his eyes were filled not with anger, but with a profound, gut-wrenching sadness. He looked shattered. "You're right," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It is cowardly. I'm so scared, Alex. I don't know who I am anymore. Everything I thought was true about myself is falling apart. And being with you, being here, it's the only thing that feels real. The only thing that feels right. And that scares me more than anything else." "Why?" I asked, my own anger beginning to dissolve, replaced by the familiar ache of wanting to understand him. "Why does that scare you?" "Because," he said, taking a hesitant step closer, crossing the threshold of the doorway. "What if I break it? What if I break you? You're the most important person in my life. You're my best friend. What if I'm just a mess, and I drag you down with me? What if this feeling, this thing that I only feel with you, what if it's not real? What if it's just a reaction to losing Sarah? And what if it is real?" I countered, my voice dropping, becoming as intimate as his confession. "What if it's the realest thing you've ever felt? You're so afraid of the what-ifs that you're not seeing what's right in front of you." We stood there, only a foot apart, the space between us humming with 7 years of unspoken feelings and 1 month of unbearable tension. The whole world seemed to contract until it was only the two of us, caught in this moment of terrifying, beautiful honesty. He searched my face, his blue eyes scanning my features as if he were seeing me for the first time. He saw the years of love I had hidden there, the hurt from his recent actions, the unwavering steadiness that he had always counted on. It was all there, laid bare for him to see. "What's right in front of me?" he whispered, the question a plea for me to say it, to make it real. I didn't answer with words. I had used enough of them. Instead, I closed the small distance between us. I raised my hand and gently cupped his jaw, my thumb stroking the rough stubble on his cheek. He leaned into my touch, his eyes fluttering closed, a soft, surrendered sigh escaping his lips. And then, I leaned in and I kissed him. It wasn't a kiss of passion or demand. It was a kiss of confirmation. It was quiet and soft and breathtakingly gentle. It was 7 years of friendship and a lifetime of yearning distilled into a single, perfect point of contact. It tasted of salt from the tears that had begun to slip down his face, and of a homecoming I had never known I was waiting for. It was a confession, an answer, and a beginning, all at once. When we finally pulled apart, we rested our foreheads together, both of us breathing as if we had just run a marathon. "That," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "That is what's right in front of you." He let out a shaky laugh that sounded suspiciously like a sob. "Okay," he said, his voice a broken, beautiful whisper. "Okay." The resolution wasn't a sudden, magical fix. It was a process, a slow and deliberate rebuilding. After the confrontation, after the kiss, we talked. For hours. We sat on the couch, but this time we faced each other, our knees touching, no screens to distract us, no pretense to hide behind. He talked about his fear, his confusion, the pressure he felt to have his life figured out, and the terror of admitting to himself that the path he was on was never the right one. He admitted that his feelings for me had been growing for a long time, a subconscious current pulling him towards my shore, but he had been too afraid to examine them, to name them. Kissing Mark had been a desperate, clumsy attempt to test the waters, only to realize he was in the wrong ocean entirely. And I talked. I told him everything. About the party in junior year, about the years of quiet, patient love, about the exquisite torture of our ritual, about the deep hurt his public denials had caused. I laid my heart bare, showing him all the hidden rooms and secret archives I had kept locked for so long. There were more tears, from both of us, but they were cleansing tears, washing away the years of silence and misunderstanding. By the time the sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gray. We were exhausted, emotionally raw, but we were finally, completely honest. We had found a new foundation, not of bedrock, but of something more fluid and resilient, built on the truth. Our new normal was quiet, and it was beautiful. The anxiety that had underscored all of our interactions vanished, replaced by a profound sense of peace. The ritual on the couch continued, but it was no longer a ritual of ambiguity. It was a deliberate act of affection. When he lay with his head in my lap now, I could run my fingers through his hair without a second thought. When he wrapped his arm around me, it was not just a search for comfort, but a statement of belonging. We were learning a new language together, one spoken not just in words, but in casual touches, shared glances, and easy, comfortable silences. The door to my apartment, once a symbol of his desperate need for entry, became a symbol of our shared life. He started leaving a toothbrush in the bathroom, a hoodie on the back of my desk chair. His things began to slowly, organically merge with mine. One evening, about 2 weeks after our talk, he came over with a box. It wasn't large, but it was significant. It held his favorite coffee mug, a couple of worn-out t-shirts he slept in, and the dog-eared copy of a novel I had recommended to him years ago. "I'm tired of my apartment," he said, setting the box on the kitchen counter. It never felt like home. Not really. He looked at me, a small, hopeful smile playing on his lips. We didn't need to label it right away. We didn't need to announce it to the world. For a while, our new relationship existed in the sacred space we had created between us. We were healing, both of us. He was healing from the implosion of the life he thought he was supposed to live, and I was healing from the long, lonely years of unrequited love. We were two halves of a whole, finally learning how to fit together without the jagged edges of secrets and fear. One Saturday morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. I found him in my kitchen, wearing one of my t-shirts, humming softly to himself as he poured 2 mugs. The morning light streamed through the window, illuminating him in a way that made my photographer's heart ache with the beauty of it. He turned and saw me, and his face broke into a genuine, unguarded smile. It was a smile I had seen 1,000 times, but this time, it was entirely for me. There was no performance, no mask. Just him. Just us. He handed me a mug. "Morning," he said, his voice warm and easy. "Morning," I replied, my hand brushing his as I took the coffee. The small spark of contact was no longer a source of anxiety, but a simple, grounding fact. He leaned in and kissed me, a soft, coffee-flavored kiss that was as comfortable and essential as breathing. It was a kiss that said good morning, and I love you, and I'm here. It was a kiss that promised a future filled with thousands of such ordinary, miraculous moments. There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. A Tuesday night, a simple knock on the door. But sometimes, the most profound moments aren't the loud, dramatic arrivals. They are the quiet mornings that follow. They are the moments when you look at the person standing in your kitchen in the soft morning light, and you realize the lock on the door was never meant to keep the world out. It was meant to be opened, to let the right person in. And you realize that home isn't a place with 4 walls and a roof. It's the beautiful, honest silence you learn to create together.